She didn't vote for the election speech. She didn't know.
Okay, we'll get to that in a moment. So page 18 is 3030 on the compromise. And you were curious about page 10? 12.
Yeah, we didn't do that one.
Thank you. That is open right now. Thank you for reminding me.
It's a compromise.
This is also an LAO compromise, 3-0 Senate side, 3-0 Assembly side, so that is closed.
Veteran Affairs.
Yes. That brings us to page 22 and the California Military Department Work for Warriors.
We did that yesterday.
And that is conforming. That is correct. Page 23 is on to the Department of Veteran Affairs and a county subvention. This was an assembly proposal. And I've got to go talk to Senator Warlock. Warlock, okay, I'll be right back. Yes, LAO, sorry.
Sean Martin with the Legislative Analyst's Office. The Assembly provided an ongoing $3 million general fund to augment the $2.6 million general fund currently provided to the 54 county veteran services offices. We understand these funds are to assist the CVSOs in contacting veterans, connecting veterans with their benefits, and continuous communication with veterans.
Thank you. Is there any report from Finance?
This was just not part of our budget. We do have $4.5 million dedicated to the CVSOs and the important work that they carry out in the community. But the augmentation is really a matter of general fund priorities.
Okay. Any other comments? Any comments from those here at the dais? The Assembly recommended the augmentation simply because the ongoing work that is necessary. We saw that at our highest peak in terms of workload, when we had hired the largest number of individuals, we had great results in terms of basically dealing with backlog of claims, those kinds of things that were very, very important. And so I think this is the one that we're looking at, the CVOs. Oh, this is, okay. The funding for another year. So anyone have any comments on that? We were providing additional funding for our county veteran service officers. Yes.
Madam Chair, I've served on the Veterans Committee a long time and been chair and represented veterans, as all of us have, over a long period of time. And the demands on the veterans are changing somewhat, but not diminishing. The Veterans Committee and the Senate are particularly paying attention to the role and the impact of the veterans who are women that have been discharged and are back out in the community. And these veteran service officers do a critical job helping our veterans solve the problems that they have with the agencies of government, Department of Veterans Affairs and the VA in Washington. So they are really very important. And our veterans really need the help. It's a very justified expenditure.
Thank you, Senator Nielsen. So I think we're going to hold this open. Difference, of course, is of $3 million. Right. The county veteran service officers providing a very important service and recognizing the $2.6 million already funded. I'm sure we could make use of another $3. The question is...
Mr. Chairman, may I add a comment, please, since we're holding this open, and I'd like to...
As soon as I finish my comment.
Sorry.
So again, as with so many of these open items, once we need to determine our revenues and then also determine among all of our priorities where we're going to move. Assemblywoman Melendez.
Thank you. My apologies for interrupting, but since we are holding this open, it doesn't seem to be a unanimous consent as to what to do with this item. I just thought I'd offer that, we have a lot more veterans coming back now from service, many of them in California. The Department of Veterans Affairs on a national level has woefully mismanaged their department and disappointed our veterans over and over again. I don't want to see California fall into the same rut of not taking care of the people who are sacrificing their lives and, you know, their careers for this state and for this country. When I served on the Veterans Committee, we would, as you know, often have people come forward and talk about the need for just people to work at these centers specifically for women's issues, which they were, you know, very much unprepared to deal with. And we can't even fund that. So I would just ask that, given, you know, when you're considering the entire budget and all of the things that we are in agreement on in funding, that this is a pittance of the budget that certainly we can give to the people who are giving everything for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And sad fact is, we've had a succession of U.S. presidents and a succession of U.S. Congresses that think that they can pay for going to war off budget, as if it's not a real budget expense. And this becomes enormous slush funds, approaching $100 billion annually for the Pentagon, as opposed to putting it into the budget and have it go through the budget process. And unfortunately, the full cost of war is never accounted for. And the full cost of war means looking forward and realizing that our service members do come back and they need services. They're traumatized in war, they're physically harmed in war, and we are left with unbudgeted and less than prepared to deal with all of those needs, and it falls to the state. So we don't have the resources to do it all. We're trying, and I think we have a lot of agreement here that our veterans and our service members are not having the promise that we've given them fulfilled. So we're going to hold this for now. Page 24, Veteran Claims Backlog. This is an Assembly proposal. Mr. Martin.
The Assembly converted funding, which was set to expire on June 30th, 2016, to ongoing. The Budget Act of 2013 appropriated $3 million general fund to the California Department of Veterans Affairs in order to support federal efforts to reduce the claims backlog within the state. And this consists of helping veterans to apply for the benefits that they're entitled to regarding their service.
So no dollars in this, it's about position authority?
That is correct. The dollars are already in the budget. However, this converts them to ongoing. When this was initially adopted, it was over a period of 3 years. So this is the last year of the funding.
So we would see this as an additional expense in out years?
In the out year, yes.
Right, okay. And any ideas for alternative methods or suggestions here?
Well, if you choose to, you could take a look at this again next spring and see over the course of the entire, by then it would almost be 3 years, the information, how effective the program was, and whether there are potential improvements that you would want to make before you would want to reappropriate funds.
What's the nature and the extent of our claims backlog?
I don't have the number on how many claims there are outstanding at the moment, but what I read in a report that was recently put out by the Department of Veterans Affairs is that the average days California's veterans were waiting for new entitlement claims for compensation in May 2013 was 344 days. And as of April 27th, 2015, the average days is 136. So this would appear to have been one of the resources brought to bear on this problem that reduced it by about 208 days.
We, originally the Assembly was funding this because we were seeing a lot of calls into our offices, a lot of delay, but also our staff looked at it and realized that we were expending a lot of state dollars with paying for resources that individuals needed because they were being delayed in getting their federal benefits. And that's how we got involved in this in 2013. And what is shown is that the backlog was at 70,000, we're down now to 24,000. We've saved something like, we have drawn down about $62 million for our in funding for our veterans that were federal dollars that they deserved and that we're no longer having to pay. So it benefits us. We've discovered that the investment we made of $3 million was quite an investment that that had tremendous dividends, not only in people getting their benefits faster and getting the information faster, but more importantly, taking a burden off the state in terms of state resources that should have been given to others were being given to our veterans. This also speaks to the fact that as we look at in terms of looking forward, we were looking at the fact that knowing that the program is scheduled to expire and the program has been successful in terms of what we wanted to do. We've had very few programs that have been as successful that when you're going to do a job, you get the job done. So we're concerned that we've trained individuals who understand the benefits and those kinds of things, and they know that this is going to expire in a year. So without any firm commitment on our part, once again, we'll be in a position of losing staff, having to get another set of staff to train and ramp them up, as we've talked about these temporary positions, kind of ramp up our staff to be prepared again. So our concern is that we know that the issue is there, it's continuing and maybe growing depending on those coming back. This is an effective way to get the services because obviously the federal government is kind of backlogged or stopped or whatever. And when that happens, we end up at the state level having to pay for the services that should have been covered under veteran services. So that was the reason why our committee recommended that we do the funding, that we don't hold it over till the program ends to start talking about funding again, because then people will see that as a kind of a retrenchment of our commitment, and as a result, we'll end up losing staff where we've trained the staff to do the job. They have saved us money in terms of the amount of money we've invested and what has happened in terms of the veterans getting the benefits. So it's one of the few programs we can point to with a smile on our face that we've been successful.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. You make a compelling argument here, again, for the same reasons. Yet to be determined final revenues and other priorities. We're going to hold it open. Page 25, district hospitals. Assembly proposal. Mr. Martin.
The Assembly adopted placeholder trailable language that would clarify the identification requirements of individuals employed by district hospitals that perform services specifically for the emergency department of a district hospital.
Thank you. Ms. Bosler.
We don't have any concerns with the language.
All right. We have a motion by
Move the Assembly version.
Senator Lark, Assembly version. And that would be 3-0? 3-0. On the Senate side, 3-0 on the Assembly side for the Assembly proposal. 26 has to do with local government financing. Assembly proposal again. Mr. Euler.
The Assembly proposed trailable language to clarify the intent of language opposed last year as part of the budget to delete a requirement that Orange County have 2 auditor positions. We haven't had an opportunity to review this language in detail, so we therefore don't have a position.
Finance.
Chris Hill for Finance. This looks like more than a technical change to us. Right now, current law says County Board of Supervisors shall biennially contract for an audit of all county officials charged with handling money. This takes that task away from the County Board of Supervisors and puts it with the County Auditor Controller, which could create a reimbursable state mandate.
I'm sorry, which could create?
A reimbursable state mandate.
A reimbursable state mandate. Would the impact, clearly then this impact would be beyond Orange County?
No, this would only affect Orange County.
It would just impact Orange County, okay. Any other counties
in
this fashion?
No. This is only specific to Orange.
Okay. Do you have an understanding as to what initiates the
We haven't been
suggested
provided
change
the
here?
background on this.
Okay. But your point being that this is a policy change.
And it also treats Orange County differently than every other county for some reason that we don't understand.
Do we have any idea why someone thinks this is a technical change? All right. Mr. Euler.
As to the reference of this being a technical change, I think just this bill is somewhat as we understand it, the intent of this language is to clarify the intent of language that was adopted as part of last year's budget, which had the intent of eliminating this requirement to have 2 auditors. And so in that way, it could be thought of as a technical cleanup to the language from last year. That being said, we haven't had an opportunity to review this in detail. There's some possibility that, given that lack of review, that there could be some unintended consequences that we're not aware of right now that take it beyond technical cleanup.
And you have similar concern with finances, this could become a mandate?
That appears to be a possibility.
Okay. So Senator Nielsen.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think it's quite clear that this is not clear. Finance or analysts, nor us, what's going on here. But I think it is clear this is a major policy change. There's nothing technical about this at all. I do not believe that there's any place for us to interject ourselves into this. If there might be some legislation or something to deal with it, but not here in the budget.
Thank you. And Mr. Euler, have you had any communications with Orange County?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Assemblywoman Melendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just very briefly, the language, if adopted, removes whistleblower protection and fraud protection as well, I think. So this is most surely a policy debate that we should be having, not one that's in the budget.
Senator Nielsen.
I forgot an important point. I am informed that the Orange County Board of Supervisors unanimously voted to oppose this change in policy. So the county's not supporting.
Right. I would agree with my colleagues. I think this is a policy change as well and should be further vetted, but at this point, we're going to hold this open.
We accept the Senate recommendation on the next one.
Okay.
I think we have to be this board.
All right. Page 27, the last page in this section has to do with deferred maintenance, and we do have a governor's proposal.
One of the state's many ongoing liabilities is deferred maintenance on its core state facilities, including universities, as well as our Department of Parks and Recreation, and also the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation and the Department of State Hospitals. The budget included $125 million general fund for this purpose, and then the May revision, there was an amendment made to shift $3 million for the state special schools into the Proposition 98 guarantee, bringing the total to $122 million deferred maintenance general fund in control section 6.10. We do not support the Senate's SRL and BBL. We think all of the deferred maintenance projects have been developed and have been well vetted, and do not think that additional review is needed. We think these projects should move forward as expeditiously as possible, and we're concerned about delay that may cause. So we support the assemblies with the shift of the $3 million for the state special school to the Proposition 98 funding.
Thank you, Ms. Bosler. Ms. Kirstein, before you begin, I'm just going to guess that given this does allow for greater legislative input, that maybe LAO is in support of the Senate version.
That is correct. Just to clarify, the Assembly approved this as budgeted. The Senate actually had 2 changes as part of their actions. First, the Senate actually moved $2 million that was for state special schools into Prop 98. And then the second piece was that the Senate proposal that they passed actually adopted the language that our office had recommended. And the reason why we had recommended this language is because it envisions that the administration would put forward lists of projects that were proposed for this funding as part of the budget process. And that would give the legislature a chance to review those lists, determine whether they're all high priorities for the legislature, whether the amounts of funding that were proposed were appropriate, or whether they should be modified during the budget process. And then the language also allows, if there are changes that need to be made, for the administration to request those changes be made through the Joint Legislative Budget Committee process. So the administration's process was just to wait until after the budget and then to propose the projects as part of that JLBC process. So it was a little bit different. We would note that we have received some lists. We've received lists from all the departments. However, a couple of the departments' lists one of them was just very recent, but one of the lists, a couple of the lists are actually substantially greater than the amount of funding that's being proposed. So for example, the UC list was $130 million for only $25 million worth of funding. So it's still unclear to us which specific projects UC is proposing to fund. State hospitals was similar. So there's those lists we do believe need further refinement at this point. And we think it's worth the legislature having knowledge of which projects will be funded before the legislature adopts this budget.
And just to clarify, in the Senate's proposal, the amount was $3 million under Prop 98. I think I heard you say $2 million.
Sorry, I had some errors in my opening comments. So that we had a $125 million proposal. $2 million has already been appropriated for CAL FIRE in the drought package. We're fine with the $3 million shift that the Senate adopted to put $3 million in the Proposition 98 guarantee. That wasn't something we proposed.
We're accepting the Senate proposal.
All right. So we do have a motion for Senate. 3-0 Senate side, 3-0 Assembly side. I understand that our Assembly colleagues now have their turn on the floor. So we've now completed general government. We will recess until 4 o'clock, hoping that the Assembly members will have, if not completed, at least gotten most of your work done. And so we'll see you all at 4 o'clock.
4 o'clock, we're back at 4.
Room for reconciliation. Thank you. Our old version would be on page 44, so there's a 43-page difference in our systems. And so we're going to start with transportation. Yes, very high level. I had to think there for a second. High-Speed Rail Research Institute. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. James Hacker, LAO. This was a Senate proposal, and the Senate approved $1.5 million in one-time PTA funding for Caltrans to identify and fund through a competitive process an organization to provide independent research on issues related to the high-speed rail project. And the Assembly took no action on this item. And we would provide 2 comments on this. First, we would note that in both budgets, Caltrans has roughly $63 million in base research funding, which this $1.5 million would augment. And second, we would note that to the extent that the legislature considers high-speed rail research a priority, they could direct Caltrans to fund this research by redirecting funding from other lower priority projects.
And I would imagine you share that with us because these are precious few transportation dollars, highway, that we have for infrastructure or other projects.
That's correct. It's a trade-off between projects or research at this point.
Right, okay. Ms. Bosler.
Yes, this wasn't part of our budget proposal, and we would just note that to the extent that these PTA monies are used on this project, they wouldn't be available for actual other transit projects that are in the queue.
Right.
And there is the research, independent research that the university transportation centers do, and there's actually $3.8 million in that for that purpose in the budget already. Okay with Assembly? Yeah. All right. We're going to wait for Senator Lauer to return, but I think we may be okay with the Assembly version.
But that's fine, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Next page is Walerga Park Sound Wall. It's an assembly proposal. Mr. Hacker.
Yep. As you know, this is an assembly proposal. Assembly approved $700,000 from the state highway account to construct the Walerga Park Sound Wall between Walerga Park and the nearby I-80 project. This project is estimated to cost about $1.2 million, and Sacramento County has already pledged $500,000 to it, contingent upon the state providing the remaining $700,000. And we would recommend going with the Senate version on this, who did not include this in their budget, as the Assembly version circumvents existing transportation funding programs and methods for setting priorities.
We concur with the LAO's comments on this. This was not in our proposal, and we would just note that Sacramento County has received approximately $135 million in their STIP allocation, and some of those monies could be prioritized for this purpose.
Thank you. I have talked to some Assembly members about this and the need for it, and I don't disagree with that need, but I do think that both LAO and Finance make a good point here. And do we have much precedent for earmarking transportation funds like this?
Typically not. Most projects are funded through the competitive process, either SHOP or STIP.
All right.
I guess the ongoing challenge, as we looked at it, and we understand the process and the things that are occurring, is that oftentimes, and our members felt to a certain extent, those on the budget committee as well as others, that I guess we need to figure out some way in which members can have their needs met in terms of what's happening in their communities. I understand that this member has worked on this for several years tirelessly, trying to get his group to fund this very needed project that everybody recognizes needs. And then at the same time, we've been allocating state dollars to the county to do these kinds of things. But as we know how that happens, you know, you have that need, you put it out there, and you give them the money, as that's the process to go through. And then they have another set of priorities that are totally unrelated to this. And so you're frustrated by the process. So, you know, this is something I know Mr. Cooley has been working on, and everybody acknowledges it's a real need, and other members have identified the same kind of thing, that they work very hard to bring resources, state dollars, into their districts to handle these critical needs. And then when it gets to that level, it's like so many things, whether it's dealing with healthcare issues that we sometimes allocate to the county, and, you know, a state has a priority that we want something done in a certain area, and then we discovered when it gets down to our county level, they have other priorities. They decide to do something else with the money. So I'm not sure what we do about this. I guess we'll hold it open and see if there's any resources floating around, but that is a real challenge, and I'm not sure how we address that challenge.
Senator Nielsen.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I could speak from the Republican side, and I've talked a lot with Senator Cooley about the issue, and I'm familiar with this little gap that never did get a wall, and it is a need, but Assemblymember Weber accurately states it. I would appreciate just keeping it open, and maybe we can take a little bit of look at tomorrow, the next day.
We certainly will keep it open. Mr. Hacker, as you mentioned, it's not practice for us to earmark these projects. Is it actually state law that we do not? Or is it just practice?
I think Jessica Peters with the Analyst Office, these funds are within your purview to appropriate, and to the extent that there was something that was a priority of the legislature, you have some other unique examples where there's sort of an off-the-top appropriation, but typically, like for maybe a very large project, but for projects of this type, they would typically be funded through the state's existing process and programs, where determining those priorities is made either at the local level or by Caltrans.
And Finance, you have a comment?
Yes, thank you. J.C. Thompson with the Department of Finance. If I could just clarify, Streets and Highways Code Section 183 actually specifies that transportation projects shall only be, allocations shall only be made on a program basis, for example, capacity or maintenance, and shall not identify the specific capital outlay projects to be funded. The Transportation Commission is responsible for allocating the funds to specific projects that are budgeted within the capital outlay program categories.
So that is statute?
It is.
All right, but out of deference to the request, we will keep this open for now. Going back to page 1, Senator Laura.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move the Assembly version, please.
The Assembly version has been moved on page 1 or page 44, depending upon your version of the book. On the Senate side, we are 2-1. On the Assembly side, we are Assembly version. Yes. 3-0 on the Assembly side for the Assembly version on page 1/44. Page 3 deals with the remediation of fish passage barriers. This is an Assembly proposal. Mr. Hacker.
As you know, this is an Assembly proposal, and the Assembly approved $5 million in state highway account funding for the remediation of fish passage barriers, and they also adopted trailer bill language requiring Caltrans to expedite the remediation of those fish passage barriers that are deemed highest priority by the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and to report to the legislature on their progress in doing so. And we would recommend going with the Assembly version on this one, as existing law actually requires Caltrans to identify and remediate fish passage barriers that are related to the state highway system. However, Caltrans' progress in this has been quite slow, particularly with regards to the high priority list identified by DFW. And in this case, both requiring Caltrans to focus on these highest priority barriers and approving funds specifically for that purpose would allow them to better comply with existing statute.
And the Assembly proposal is a one-time appropriation?
It's a one-time $5 million appropriation.
One time, all right. Assemblyman Bloom.
I would just add that this is a higher priority now because of the drought, with streams and rivers drying up. Preserving the existing fisheries is becoming more and more urgent.